Gran Touring Motorsports started as a social group of car enthusiasts, but we've expanded into all sorts of motorsports disciplines, and we want to share our stories with you. Years of racing, wrenching, and motorsports experience brings together a top-notch collection of knowledge and information through our podcast, Break Fix.
Hi, thanks for joining us on Tech Transforms. I'm Carolyn Ford, and I'm here with Mark Senell. Hello, Mark.
Good morning, Carolyn.
Good morning. Today's a fun one because
we have invited our friend, Eric Monterastelli, to join us on a crossover episode for this morning's Tech Transforms.
Well said. And his podcast is Break Fix. So thanks for being here, Eric. And we're super excited to talk to you today.
That's right, folks. And it's not uncommon to see IT branding plastered across the side of race cars in many motorsports disciplines. Names like AWS, CrowdStrike, and SailPoint immediately come to mind. But for application performance monitoring and artificial intelligence, the relationship between technology and racing goes far beyond stickers and sponsorship dollars. So as Carolyn pointed out, this is a crossover episode between Break Fix and Tech Transforms, and I'd like to personally thank Mark and Carolyn for having us on their show to explore this idea.
Yeah, and like what you just said there, Eric, it's a little bit geeked out for me, I'm not going to lie. So let's just get really basic for me and talk about cars and racing first, and tell me how you got into cars and racing just in general.
I'll keep it brief because I think that could be a whole episode unto itself.
Okay.
So for your audience, Gran Touring Motorsports was founded in late 2013, officially 2014. And our mantra is to continue to spread motorsports enthusiasm. The idea is that people understand that there's multiple disciplines to racing, and racing is a big part of our world, whether you believe it or not. The chemistry, the science, the technology, the engineering that trickles down into your daily car is incredible. And it all stems from manufacturers using the racetrack as their test center. So think about it from that perspective. Here at GTM, we want to continue to spread that enthusiasm, because if we don't, racing will dry up and that advancement in technology ceases to exist. We've been around now almost 8 years. We have our own podcast, Break Fix. We talk about all sorts of different things, ranging from the super technical episodes all the way up to advice episodes like what should I buy and things of that nature. But personally, I got into cars by way of genetics. Grandfather to my dad, and now to me, and hopefully I get to pass it on to my daughters along the way. And so we've been tied into the racing community for a very long time, and myself included. I have been a high performance driving instructor now for almost a decade. And then before that, autocrossing. Before that, I was a kart racer nationally, things of that nature. So it's unfortunately in the blood. But what I find most interesting about it is that there's a huge intersection between the automotive world and the IT world. And so I also followed in my father's footsteps, who was a mainframe programmer. So I had the IT side, I also had the racing side, but as a younger racer, I was also involved in things like timing and scoring. I went to work for British Aerospace, where I tried desperately to get in on their helicopter division because I was actually working on engine management systems at another company. So again, data, technology, IT, racing, it's all very intertwined. But as I grew more into pro-am racing, into time trials and other disciplines, I started to realize how valuable the data that we collect, not just from the cars, from the track and from the motors and all this stuff, related to what I was doing in the sim and threat intelligence world, and also in the APM and artificial intelligence space. So there's this, again, huge crossover there, and I want to be able to explore that with you guys.
So Eric, it seems to me that in the 60s and 70s, the things that teams would do to increase their edge was around the mechanics and the infrastructure of the cars. It seems like over the last 20 years, there has been that shift to IT and leveraging technology to give racers an edge on the racetrack.
So you're 100% right, Mark. And I'll use an example. Colin Chapman, the founder of Lotus, is infamously known for both pushing the boundary and cheating like crazy. Because what he did is he found loopholes in the rules where he could take experimental technology and push the boundaries of racing and engineering. So how do you control that? More rules get put into place. You try to squelch that. You penalize people, all these kinds of things. But really what he was doing is he was moving everything forward. So back then in the 60s and 70s, and even still partially in the 80s, where you didn't have big data available, it was all trial and error. Let's use Formula One as an example. You'll see cars back in the 70s with 6 wheels. They're like, why is that a good idea? Because somebody needed to try. Chaparral was famous for mounting fans on the bottom of the cars to try to absorb them into the pavement, right? To create ground effects instead of doing studies in aerodynamics, right? Because
so the cars wouldn't fly off the racetrack.
Exactly. Right. So there's all this trickery and all this crazy stuff that they would do, but we've shifted away from that. We've shifted away to raw data to say, what is that tire doing in that corner under load at this pound of pressure? But if we change it by half a pound, what difference does that make? How much more G can we pull in that corner, right? We've gotten to the deeper layers of the science and the engineering to make these cars go faster. And that's why if you look at a Formula One car of today versus of 1960, it's completely different.
So to bridge the physical to the digital, cars have sensors, these microchips all embedded throughout the structure of the car to feed that data back.
They do, like even on the tires?
Oh, yeah.
No.
So get this. So starting in about the 1990s, in the advent of something known as OBD1, so now we all run OBD2 or CAN bus, there's actually a port in the car that you can tie a laptop into and pull all sorts of information from all over the vehicle. More and more manufacturers are putting that up on the heads-up displays and on the dashboards these days, which is fantastic. It's right there at your fingertips. But starting in the 90s, they needed a way to interface with the engine because they were putting in more and more sensors thanks to electronic and programmable fuel injection, engine management, it's also known as. So there's a sensor for water, there's a sensor for oil, there's a sensor for pressure, there's a sensor for the rotational speed of the motor at the crank and at the cam and all this crazy stuff. It's very nitnoid information, and it's all to keep the engine running at maximum efficiency under multiple conditions. So just because you're tooling down the highway, that computer on board is making corrections in microseconds, if not faster.
Wait, it's correcting itself?
Yes, it is a self-correcting computer.
So AI?
So the electronics we have are just a much more simplified version of that, not corrective.
All cars, even your street cars,
Oh,
have these self-healing, self-correcting computers. And the way it works is a lot of it is for emissions, a lot of it is for efficiency, a lot of it is for power. So for instance, in the old days, I'll draw a parallel to maybe some of our listeners will understand, a carburetor is very static. You jetted it a certain way, ran terribly when it was cold and the barometric pressure was wrong, and then you had to rejet it and tweak it and get under the hood to get it to purr just perfectly. Now with electronic fuel injection, it takes that into account. It takes into atmospheric pressure, air temperature, elevation, all this kind of stuff, and it makes corrections based on where you are, where the pedal is at any given time. In a sense,
are we talking about AI?
We're talking about mechanical AI.
My car.
Yes.
Whoa. Okay.
That's pretty cool, huh?
Well, yeah, like I'm in my mind, I'm drawing all these parallels to what you do for work with the government and how these race cars and cars in general work.
That's right. So telemetry used in a race car finds itself on the back of a Humvee, finds itself in a tank, finds itself on an airplane. So weapon systems, navigation systems, all that can be tied back in some ways to the automotive world, including GPS work, because we do use GPS telemetry as well to calculate speed, distance, and all sorts of additional telemetry when objects are in motion.
Does the government use the data gathered on the racetrack?
So I'll put it this way. I've worked on some projects that were tied into engine management on tanks and Humvees. So it is possible. I don't know that I can expand too much further on that, but the data collected there is very similar to the data that's collected in your passenger car as well as a race car.
That's cool.
I'd imagine it's probably more finely tuned for aircraft than for
You think?
land vehicles. I would guess. I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking.
In the airplane, yes, because you have to take into consideration yaw and pitch and elevation and all the atmospheric conditions. But that's also true in other disciplines of motorsport. So if I'm talking about off-roading, the terrain and the pitch and yaw of the vehicle is extremely important when I'm looking at using sensors to show the articulation of my suspension, right? How much suspension travel do I have? How much rotation per axle am I using? Like, do I need to transfer power from the front wheels to the rear wheels? You see those commercials all the time from Audi and Subaru about how it does all this stuff. A lot of that is computer controlled. It's very much that mechanical AI making those decisions based on the sensors and the telemetry that it's collecting in real time.
I imagine in the performance racing industry, when you're going at speeds at 200 miles per hour or greater, and decisions need to be made in milliseconds, it ups the ante a lot greater.
That is very true. I mean, we're not at Mach 2 or whatever, like a fighter jet, but you're absolutely correct. And in both cases, there's still that common denominator of, as we say in our world, the meat behind the steering wheel. There's still an organic computer making those minute by minute or second by second decisions with the, let's call it augmented reality of that AI in the vehicle, controlling those multitudes of different systems that are helping that person, that pilot, that driver be able to do what they do.
You talk about a lot of tech companies plaster their names on the sides of cars, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to lie. I thought it was a testosterone thing, but you said something. You said there's this intersection between the racing and the tech world. Is it just an advertising ploy, or is there more to it?
Now, so if you ever speak to any race engineers, or if you happen to go to, say, IMSA race, where you can actually get really, really close to the pit boxes, like something like the Rolex 24 Hours or the Salem 6 Hours at Watkins Glen or something like that. If you can get your eyes inside the booth, you'll see that it looks like a command center. You think you were at NASA. It's all screens, all data coming in real time over wireless into the booth. Race engineers are analyzing the data, and they're also leveraging platforms like AWS and Azure to run their applications. So they need to be able to get this stuff immediately, because what they can do from those, let's say, control booths is also send corrections back to the car. Now, some drivers, let's say Formula One, if you've ever looked at the steering wheel, they got dials and knobs and they can make changes, and they're talking back and forth with the pit constantly. Hey, the car's doing this. And they're like, all right, give it a little bit of tweak on this dial and it'll make a change to the suspension as they're driving. But there's also other disciplines of racing, especially endurance racing, where they're watching the cars for longer periods of time and they need to be able to manage them over the course of that race. They can send over the air changes to the vehicles.
Are they correlating the data? Like in this command center, do they have a big seam that they're pulling everything in and cross tabbing and data analysis? Or do you have specialists, like one's looking at the tires and one's looking at the heat? So I don't know what you look at.
You have both. You actually have both. And then you also have on-track telemetry. So you've got folks that are responsible for certain parts of the car, let's say the tires, that are responsible for fueling. I mean, you can get really deep on many different portions of that stack. Let's call it the racing stack there that goes on race day. On the other side of it, it's also the telemetry from the track. There you have people that are just watching the weather, that are studying the weather and how the weather conditions, slight changes in temperature of the air are going to change the way the motor performs, like losing upwards of, let's say, 20 horsepower because there's 1 degree of weather change, or rain is on its way, right? We got to make strategic decisions on what tires we're going to use, how long are we going to stay out. We just passed Le Mans a weekend or two ago, and that track is famous for being rain on one side and being completely dry on the other, because a full lap is almost 9 miles long. So
is that the one in Ford versus Ferrari? This is all I know. I love that movie.
Absolutely. So there's a lot to take in. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of different, what I call sources of authority that are providing data, just like there would be in an IT ecosystem, right? You've got firewalls, you've got routers, you've got IPSs, Active Directory, you've got storage systems that are providing you with tons of metrics, and you have to have a way to correlate all that together and make sense of it. And if there's a problem, and if you happen to listen to Le Mans 2 weekends ago, they could pinpoint an issue on the car before even the driver could tell it was about to happen. And they're always talking back and forth. They're like, hey, this is about to go down. You should bring the car in. We want to look at this particular thing. A sensor is telling us that there's an issue. The same is true of IT. If you can forecast that, let's say, hey, we've got an IOP degradation here on this particular, SAN server, and it's going to cause this ripple effect. We're going to have to V-motion. We're going to have to do this. That's going to cause an outage. Now we're going to have, looking at real user monitoring, we're going to have an issue where we're going to have people that are down are going to be stuck in limbo. The same is true on the racetrack. So there's this interesting intersection between these two worlds, where racing is this more mechanical application performance monitoring versus what we're used to on the IT side of the house. View a race car as an application. View the track as an ecosystem, very similar to your data center or to your mission application that you might be working on right now.
Mark?
I think I've melted Carolyn's brain.
Maybe a little bit. Just a little bit.
I'm interested to see how you can maybe talk a little bit more about how you apply some of those disciplines from the performance racing side to IT that we see or that we're talking to government customers about.
There's always the physical side of racing, the car, the machine, the boat, the airplane, whatever it might be. But there's also the driver's side. How do you determine a talented driver from another driver? There's also another subcomponent of data there.
Is that like the end user?
Absolutely. Lewis Hamilton, 8-time world champion Formula One driver. He was good. He was naturally talented. If they left him where he was, maintaining the status quo, he would have only gotten so much better. So then there's the telemetry of the driver. It coincides with the telemetry of the car, but it has to do with, their physical abilities. It has to do with their risk mitigation. It has to do with how consistent they are on track. That's key on track, is consistent lap times, being not a second apart. A second is a light year. You need to be hundredths, if not tens of thousands of a second lap per lap. You need to be that precise. Racing is a precise sport. So that being said, there's other forms of telemetry that we use to better the drivers and help teach them and help educate them and get them away from the status quo. So I relate that back to continuous monitoring, CI/CD pipeline, all these kind of things, where not only is my driver the end user, but he's also my mission app. And how do I make my mission app better? How do I make it more efficient?
How are you monitoring the driver app? Is the driver hooked up to sensors?
Sometimes, yes. Actually, in the longer endurance races, they do have health and status monitors, because they are in the car for long periods of time. In a race like Le Mans, there's a minimum of 3 drivers per team. Sometimes there's 4, depending, and they'll do double stints. They're out there for 6 hours, or they're out there for 3 hours at a time. That's a lot to take in, right? You have to think health, hydration, nutrition, all that stuff. I mean, there's doctors on staff. Let's take that out of the equation. But also, how do I make that guy be consistent for 3 hours in the middle of the night when he's only running on 2 hours of sleep? I mean, obviously I could probably inject him periodically.
It's like
adrenaline.
It's like think of the endurance of like doing an Ironman. But when you're going 200 miles per hour, 220 down a straightaway, you have to be alert. So it does make a difference. I think about the endurance when you sit in a car for 8 hours.
Yeah.
So to go back to your question and to your point, there's one system, even in my more grassroots world, where I'm teaching folks that, might be from the government, or they might be from industry, or they might be from wherever, that, they got this bucket list. Maybe they bought a Porsche, they retired, or a Corvette, and they want to go out and experience the track. Well, how do I make them better? I can teach them how to be safe. I can teach them how to be fast. But if I want them to be perfect and be consistent, I have to use data. It's in my toolbox of things. There's been a go-to product for a very long time known as the AIM. It's an Italian product. They have a whole series, the AIM Solo and the Smarty system and the MXs and all these different pieces. And what it does is you attach it to the car very simply. It's not something, I have to tie in and integrate like an octopus into the vehicle. I can throw it up on the dashboard, leveraging internal gyros. It's leveraging GPS to determine land speed, rate, G-forces, and all this kind of stuff, and show me laps. I can then bring all that telemetry in, put it up on a screen, and show a driver, this is the turn you're suffering the most on. It feels good, but we're not going fast enough. This is where we need to fix your braking zone. You're off by X amount, lap after lap. We can get in a little deeper. We can get a little closer. The car is telling us this. Even though we're not integrated into the car, we can still make those connections. Now, there's some more advanced tools. There's a system by Garmin now, which, they're famous for standalone GPS systems for a multitude of applications. They just developed one for racing now, and it gives you immediate feedback. It actually uses AI to say, that was good, that was bad, do this, make these changes. It actually has the tracks preloaded in them with some baseline information to give you that feedback. And so a driver can kind of see that out of the corner of their eye or go back and review. I actually happen to be friends with Andrew Rains, who's the owner of Apex Pro, and they actually use ML in their platform that can be attached to the car, and it learns on a turn by turn, lap by lap basis, and gives the driver immediate feedback to say, you can go deeper into this corner, you can push harder, and all this. And it's learning on the fly. It also has ways to tie into that mechanical AI into the motor, as do the other 2 products I mentioned, to pull engine data, to pull sensor data. And that's why I'm saying we can bridge the mechanical with the meat behind the steering wheel and make you a better driver using data.
Everything you're talking about, it gets me really excited. So what you're doing in your day job for the government, basically same thing. You're monitoring what's going on, or enabling that monitoring, right? With the tools that you use, with the AI tools, with the APM tools, to detect before the meat behind the computer even knows there's something wrong. Those tools are going to detect and send alerts.
Exactly. When I talk about APM and artificial intelligence, I actually use a lot of cross references into the racing world. For example, data logging, we use logs all the time in this world as well, right? It's one of the major sources of authority outside of networking data and host data, et cetera. So we do data logging as well, right? We're going to pull in all that log data from the system. We're going to look at that at the same time. It helps us make a decision, find out what that root cause is to whatever the problem is, mechanical or physical. We also have what we call flight recorders. You see that in airplanes all the time. We do that in the APM space with session replay. I can go back and reconstruct someone's lap. I can tell you what gear they were in, what speed they were at, when they were braking, when they were accelerating, how much G they were pulling in a turn, all this stuff, all through that data by pulling all that sensor data in. So when I talk about APM, I use three terms. I like rules of three. It applies to a lot of things in life. I use the terms visibility, telemetry, and fidelity. Visibility, getting your eyes up, having that situational awareness, understanding what's going on in your ecosystem, getting your arms around all those pieces, all those tools, all those components, those sensors. Telemetry is that raw data that's coming in, whether it be the logs, whether it be the network information, engine data, track data, weather data, whatever it is you're bringing in, it's all disparate. It has to be correlated, like you said earlier. And then fidelity. Fidelity is the granularity, the usefulness of that information. And I often draw a parallel on one of my slides. I talk about a typical GPS that you'd use in your car versus racing telemetry. Typical GPS only needs 3 satellites to quote unquote triangulate on you. But to do an object at high speed, I need a minimum of 8. Usually it's 12, by the way. That fidelity that those 8 satellites bring in gives me more granularity. I can go from your exit is 100 meters away to you're traveling at 200 miles an hour. And at this exact millimeter, you turn the wheel and this is where you loaded up, the front right tire. So that fidelity is important because, as I've always said, a database is only as good as the questions that it can answer. So what we're trying to do on both sides of the house, both APM and the racing world, is make data-driven decisions. That's the important part in all of this. How do we make things better? Well, we can't do it like in the 60s and 70s by trial and error. We got to do it with data. It's the only way.
You could take this conversation that Eric is applying to racing, you could just drop it right into a conversation that you're having with a government application owner or digital experience officer, what have you, because you have the full stack observability that you want to provide to the customer. You have the end user experience, which is how they're experiencing the service or the application that you're providing to them. And then you have the AI ops, the CI/CD pieces that help you find problems before they become a problem so that you can avert the issue and eliminate outages quicker, et cetera.
So Carolyn, at the top of our conversation, you asked me, how did I get into racing? I have to go back because it's a bit of a chicken and egg. So is it the allure and the sound of the motors and let's say the appeal of cars in general? Or was it the IT side that drew me in? I'll let you kind of think about that because they both do go hand in hand and they are both applicable in each other's worlds.
Well, and this analogy, like listening to you talk, Eric, just makes me think about how the technology in our lives, but in the lives of our government employees, it makes them better at their jobs. It improves the efficacy of whatever technology they're using, whether they're trying to make a tank work, whether they're trying to order a bar of soap for the ship that they're on. All of this monitoring is so important just to improve our lives.
Absolutely. And one of the things that comes out of that is this concept of, it started as BYOD, bring your own device, and now we have IoT, the Internet of Things. I hate the fact that people lump cars into that category of an appliance, where it's like, yeah, I can IP enable my toaster and it'll tell me how hot the toaster is running and how long it toasted the bread for. And it still just toasts bread. But when you boil back and you peel back the onion of a vehicle, whether it's a tank, whether it's an airplane, a ship, a car, any type of vehicle, truck, whatever it might be, it's way more complicated than people realize. That ecosystem is tightly packed into a small space, but replicates these larger data centers that we deal with day in and day out. So it's kind of fun to peel that back and also important to engage younger folks so they understand the STEM that's also involved in the motorsport and automotive world. Like I mentioned earlier, chemistry, physics, engineering, aerodynamics, thermodynamics. I mean, the list goes on and on of the places that you can go niche and go deep and just geek out on in the automotive world. But that also applies to what we do day in and day out, supporting our government customers, talking about APM, making these mission apps better, and dealing with the individual missions themselves. I mean, on a regular basis, I talk to folks in the Navy about how we're going to implement APM on a ship versus how they're using it at the PX, right? They're dynamically different, but applicable in the same way.
Exactly. And then you've got the whole dynamic of the meat behind the steering wheel or the computer. I don't know how I like being referred to as meat, but I'm going to go.
Well, on Star Trek, they would have called you a bag of mostly water. So.
Oh, that's funny.
This has been really fun. We're to the part of the hour, our tech talk questions. So just some quick.
Well, good, because I've got some pit stop questions for you guys. So we'll go tit for tat.
All righty then. Well, shall we do tech talk first and then pit
Sure
stop?
thing.
All right, Eric, what do you think the next big leap in tech will be? Or what do you want it to be?
I want some of the technology that we're used to in the data center world to find its way into the SOHO world. And SOHO being small office, home office, because we don't practice what we preach, where we want to make things better. We want to protect ourselves. And then suddenly you hear about, oh, my data got compromised. I got to buy this thing and protect my ID and all these and it feels a little gimmicky. I've been fed the whole antivirus thing for a long time. I'd rather be able to present a box that provides a defense in depth strategy to keep us all safe at home, especially now in the last 2 years where more people are working from home and we've had to bring the office home with us. We don't have the same luxuries all the time that we would in the corporate space. We're still attached to those data centers remotely through the cloud and people are monitoring this and whatnot, but it would be nice to have that security blanket, that sense of protection against the outside world by bringing some of that into the house and making it turnkey. I think that's the most important part about a lot of things in our space is making them easier for everybody to use.
Yeah. It's got to be plug and play or I'm not using it.
I want to ask you back to racing.
Sure.
And this may be happening. Do you see racing moving from combustible engines to electric?
So we call that the EV revolution. We ask people that question a lot. And so there is already a discipline of motorsport known as Formula E that is basically Formula One cars with EV power plants. Watching them evolve in the last couple of years has been fascinating because that has been a jump in technology that's going to find its way into passenger cars. They initially started out having teams of drivers representing countries. It was kind of like the Olympics, right? Or like international race of champions type of deal. So you had Team Britain, Team Italy, Team Germany, and they've all got their cars and their liveries and everything. And what they would do is when they would run out of power, they would jump in another car and away they would go. The problem with that model is it's not sustainable because each car, although created quote unquote equally, doesn't perform equally, much like applications put into an Azure environment versus an AWS environment, right? The backends are slightly different and that kind of thing. So what they did is they went through trial and error and they looked at the data as well. And they said, you know what? We're going to keep the car the same, keep the drivers the same, and we'll make the battery packs switchable and get it down to the point where we can swap them in the same amount of time as it would take to swap tires in a pit stop or do a fuel stop. So that's incredible. And that's been talked about in the EV world for passenger cars is why do I have to drive to a Sheetz and plug in and wait 20 minutes to charge? Why can't I go up to like a battery bank and switch one out and throw it in my car and keep driving?
I would buy an e-vehicle today if I could do that.
So it's coming.
Would you, how would you feel about that though, Eric, if we got rid of like the combustion, what kind of engine is it?
Internal combustion engine or ICE engine. So the biggest pushback I've heard from petrol heads is that what we will lose is the sensory part of racing. One of the big things is the auditory side of this, which is the sound of a motor. If you've ever gone to an IMSA race like Rolex or Le Mans, which like we talked about just happened, you can identify the different brands before you even see them. You know the sound of a Corvette over a Ferrari, over a Porsche. They're very distinct because they're very differently built. When you get an EV, what do you hear? You get this high-pitched whine from the transmission and otherwise it's air noise. So that's the biggest drawback that people have presented. Now, what I'm really curious to see is, I believe it's next year, the NHRA came out this year. This is the drag race guys. These are the folks that go in a straight line really, really fast. They have put together an EV class. And so there's a little bit of wah-wah and people going, I don't know how I feel about this. I'm excited to see it because A, I want to see what kind of data they're going to put down, but B, I want to see how it changes the dynamic of that discipline of racing.
I mean, speed is speed, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But if the fans are still tuning in and they're still going to races with the EV cars there and they haven't totally turned their backs and gotten another beer and a hot dog, then that's saying something. And I think the proof will be live when we see that happen.
All right, we've gone off script for the tech talk, but I do want to ask one more tech talk question, and then we'll let you do your pit stop. What's inspiring you in tech, which can cross over to cars? I have now learned. You've schooled me sufficiently. What are you reading or watching or listening to that's inspiring you?
That's a twofold question, because with my background, and I know we didn't dive into that too deeply, I've always been tied into cybersecurity. The big thing for me has always been SIM and threat intelligence, and now obviously APM, which they all go hand in hand. They're very close cousins. So I want to see where we go with that. I'm keeping tabs on former companies and things like that I worked for, and some of the developments that they're doing there, especially with how they're handling 0 day. And there's a lot of talk about zero trust, how we're handling IOCs that are popping up all over the place. So I'm really kind of geeking out on that. And thanks.
But where do you geek out? Like, what do you read? What are you following? Do they just need to follow you on LinkedIn and you'll start posting for us?
Yes, that would be probably the easiest thing.
All right, there we go.
Yeah, I spend more time reading automotive journals than I do tech stuff. I'll be honest about that. On the other side of that, there's the whole, we were all stuck at home binging Netflix and Hulu. And, I stumbled across something that I found to be inspiring in a different way as a retrospective into the IT world, kind of looking back on where we came from and how we got to today. And it does tie into sports cars just a little bit, and one of the main characters. So if you haven't watched AMC's Halt and Catch Fire, which is a reference to the old days when you would put a computer into an infinite loop mode, it tells the story of companies like McAfee, like Symantec, like Compaq, like AOL and Yahoo, and et cetera. And it's done in this dramatization, kind of similar to Mad Men, if you appreciated that, but without some of the undertones that Mad Men has. This started in the late 70s, early 80s, and it goes for 4 seasons. And it's absolutely incredible. It's really fun to watch. And it's really fun to see where these companies came from, the birth of cybersecurity and things like that. So I highly recommend that if you want to geek out on something, maybe still in the realm, but you don't have to put so much attention into and have a lot of fun with. And the acting is absolutely phenomenal. So.
Perfect. See, that's right up my alley. I can watch it.
All right.
All right.
Flip the script here. Ask you guys a couple of our more common pit stop questions. Sexiest car of all time, Mark.
Probably the Stingray Corvette in the late 60s, the convertible.
Good choice. Carolyn.
Convertible Ford Mustang.
Oh, what year though? There's so many different variations of the Mustang.
Yeah, so I like the earlier ones, not the 70 version, which was my first car, by the way.
I'm sorry for you.
A little bit earlier. Hey, it was a Ford Mustang. I was happy enough.
64, 65, 66.
Whatever it takes.
The Iacocca era of Mustangs. Yes, those are the good ones. None of that Pinto-based stuff. No. So, ugliest car of all time, Carolyn.
Oh, there's so many.
There's so many.
I can't say. I don't know.
Probably
the Pinto.
Well, the Pinto is pretty ugly.
Pretty ugly.
Yeah. I mean, the Gremlin's pretty ugly.
Oh, yeah,
too.
pretty ugly.
Maybe the Thing.
The Volkswagen Thing. Yeah, also known as the Kubelwagen, which was a German military Jeep. I could nerd out on that for a while too, but no, those are all good answers. Very good. So one of our favorites is what we call the 3-car garage and or $1 million person question. So if you had $1 million or more, basically unlimited funds to fill a 3-car garage, what would you put in it? And maybe you guys have a combined garage if you can't come up with 3 cars of your own. So we'll go with Mark.
Well, I have an AMG now, so I like that. I would keep that. Probably more of a utility kind of SUV car for the more practical things in life. And then I've always...
What's your crazy poster on the wall kind of car? Like I want to have a Lamborghini Countach or something.
Yeah, probably like a Porsche 911 Carrera or something like that.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
All right. So my dad rebuilt from the floorboards up a Ford 46.
Oh, nice.
That would be in my garage. I would have a truck because I always need one. And I would have an electric vehicle for getting around town. How boring is that?
What, any specific EV that has your attention right now? Are you a Tesla girl? Are you a Porsche fan?
I mean, I don't really care as long as it's Like spending 100 grand for a car. Sorry, guys. Like that's just not, no.
Oh, big
So-
toys for big boys.
Like I need it to be in my price range and I need it to be reliable.
Well, Tesla's apparently coming out with a very affordable car soon, I think.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's fine.
Didn't they
If-
say
I'm
that
like-
about the Model 3 though?
Yeah, exactly. Also, the
Yeah.
windshield won't break. That was in the truck and we all watched
It's
that.
the Cybertruck.
Yep. My dog needs to be able to get into all of them. So it's got to be big enough for
That makes
Han Solo.
sense. If you have extra time and you want to learn about all the upcoming EVs and things that are out there, tune into our monthly drive-through episode where my sister happens to be our resident, let's call her EV expert, also executive producer, and she covers a lot of what's on the horizon, not just Teslas. There's some interesting stuff hitting our shores from overseas. So if you want to nerd out on EVs, definitely check that out. But with that being said, Mark and Carolyn, I cannot thank you enough for having me on Tech Transforms for this crossover episode.
Thank you, Eric.
Yes. And so, folks, for more information on Tech Transforms, if you're listening to this on the Break Fix podcast server, be sure to follow them on Twitter and LinkedIn at Tech Transforms and tune into more Tech Transforms podcast episodes where they talk to some of the most prominent influencers shaping the information technology landscape to understand how they are leveraging technology to solve complex challenges while also meeting the needs of today's modern world.
Thank you, Eric Montarastelli. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And tune in, listeners, to his Break Fix podcast for more very entertaining conversations. And you can geek out on cars. Thank you, listeners, for joining us today. Please go out, smash that like button, follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
If you like what you've heard and want to learn more about GTM, be sure to check us out on www.gtmotorsports.org. You can also find us on Instagram at Gran Touring Motorsports. Also, if you want to get involved or have suggestions for future shows, you can call or text us at 202-630-1770 or send us an email at crewchief@gtmotorsports.org. We'd love to hear from you.
Hey everybody, Crew Chief Eric here. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of Break Fix, and we wanted to remind you that GTM remains a no annual fees organization, and our goal is to continue to bring you quality episodes like this one at no charge. As a loyal listener, please consider subscribing to our Patreon for bonus and behind-the-scenes content, extra goodies, and GTM swag. For as little as $2.50 a month, you can keep our developers, writers, editors, casters, and other volunteers fed on their strict diet of Fig Newtons, gummy bears, and Monster. Consider signing up for Patreon today at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. And remember, without fans, supporters, and members like you, none of this would be possible.